Two different men called police to report the same murder.
And what makes you think that she has been killed? Look at her. You just have to look at her.
Apparently, neither one knew that the other had called. The investigation uncovered even more unusual circumstances. But a few tiny seeds and a discarded candy wrapper were more than just insignificant clues. They told a story of revenge. Like many divorced people, Pamela Sweeney hoped she'd find someone to share her life with. Construction worker Larry Fleck was the man she set her sights on.
We were planning on getting married. We were talking about probably moving out of Minneapolis at one time. I don't know, we're just having a good time, the two of us.
She was a little kid full of life. And I don't know really how to explain it. She would just made the house light up.
Pamela worked as a secretary for a computer company outside Minneapolis. The most important thing in her life was her 5-year-old son, Tony. On the Friday before Memorial Day in 1991, Pam told her parents she wasn't feeling well and asked if they could take care of her son overnight. She told them she was just going to take a bath and go to bed. But before she did, she spoke with her boyfriend.
She says, "What time are you getting off tonight?" I said, "Well, I got to work pretty late." I said, "It's going to be late." She says, "Well, why don't you come over?" I said, "It's going to be really late." She says, "I want you to come over tonight."
Fleck says he arrived at Pam's house around 3 o'clock in the morning. When he looked into Pam's bedroom, he knew something was terribly wrong.
I seen a spot of blood up on the headboard. Oh my goodness. And in the bed, she was laying crossways, all wrapped up, rolled up in a blanket. I didn't want to do it, but I took the covers and I rolled them back, and there she was laying.
Fleck ran to a neighbor's house to call police.
Okay, did you see her?
She's dead. She's cut all the hell.
Okay, hold on just a second. Okay, Larry?
Less than 2 minutes later, as police were on their way, they got another telephone call. This one from one of Pam's co-workers, Patrick Walsh.
Is it the Sweeney residence?
Yeah.
Okay, what's the problem there, sir?
There's been somebody killed.
Okay, who?
Pam Sweeney.
Pam Sweeney?
Yeah.
Okay.
We had 2 males.
When Pam Sweeney was found murdered in her own bed, police had to deal with a highly unusual situation. 2 men were at the scene. They didn't know each other, but both knew the victim.
Everybody's a suspect. And when they got out there, they had Patrick Walsh. He's a suspect. He's secured. He's handcuffed. They processed the scene. Larry Fleck was at the neighbor's house. Another officer went there to secure him.
Pam Sweeney had been shot 4 times, stabbed 4 times, and her clothing had been partially removed.
You go numb. You a thug, like your heart hits the bottom of your stomach and you don't know it's just like there's a humming going on in your head. You don't know what's going on around you.
Pam's parents were asked who they thought might have killed their daughter, and they had a ready answer.
I thought her ex-husband was the one that done it. He had 30-something weapons in the house. He tried to be a big gun collector, and he had some big guns. So first thing I thought was, well, since it's Pam, it's got to be Mike.
At Pam's home, there were no signs of forced entry. And there was another clue that Pam knew her killer.
We believe after he completed the final blow and she was dead and he saw the dead body, he, in an act of contrition, covered the body completely. It was completely covered. We think he did that so as not to see what he did, to cover it up, out of sight, out of mind.
The murder weapons could not be found in the house. But as the sun rose, investigators saw a path in the dew that had settled on the lawn. It led to a wooded area behind the house.
The officers got on their hands and knees and went through that backwoods inch by inch.
Back there was found a knife which had been stuck into the ground right to the handle, and a small revolver was found lodged under some loose boards that were laying behind the shed.
The knife matched a set of kitchen knives inside the house. The pistol was the same caliber as the one used in the crime. Both had been wiped clean of blood and fingerprints. In front of Pam's home, investigators found a clue first thought to be insignificant. In Patrick Walsh's truck, police found a candy wrapper. The same candy was found in Pam Sweeney's kitchen. But this brand of candy had a lot number on the wrapper. When police compared the lot number on the candy in Pam's house with the wrapper in Walsh's truck, it was a match.
So we drew an inference from that this guy, while he was there, was calm enough actually to take one of those bags of candy out of the drawer and eat it.
But this was inconsistent with Walsh's story. He said after he found Pam's body, he called police, then ran outside to his car to try to get her. While investigating the murder of 35-year-old Pamela Sweeney, police had 3 suspects: Pam's ex-husband, her boyfriend, and her co-worker. Police learned that Pam's ex-husband was with friends on the night of the murder and was eliminated as a suspect. Pam's boyfriend also denied any involvement.
They ask questions like how long I knew her, if I always come over there that time of night, you know, why so late in the evening I show up at this person's house, and basically asked me if I did, and I said no, you know, I'm in love with this person. Why would anybody want to do something like that to someone?
She told friends that Walsh asked her out on numerous occasions and wouldn't take no for an answer. He also stopped by her home unannounced and performed various household chores without being asked in an attempt to win her affections.
He had been stalking her for months, obsessed with her physically in his mind and his entire being.
She's never talked to me about it. She's never said somebody was taunting her or following her or things like that. She's never said a word to me.
Pam did, however, go to the police, but they told her Walsh hadn't broken the law and there was nothing they could do. In their search for evidence, investigators focused on the vegetation found on Walsh's clothes and shoes. Walsh said it probably got there when he walked across Pam's front lawn towards his car. This gave police an idea.
We did something I had never done before. We contacted the University of Minnesota and we asked for a taxonomist, a forensic taxonomist.
A taxonomist is an expert in living organisms. Dr. Anita Chalawa examined the various bits of leaves, grass, and other vegetation from Walsh's clothing.
There was lawn grass, there was crabgrass, and the oddball things, there were some seeds of quackgrass.
Quackgrass is a common weed, and it rarely produces seeds since people usually mow it before it gets to the flowering stage. This meant that the quackgrass seeds on Walsh's clothing were rare and unusual. Dr. Chalawa also discovered another species on Walsh's clothes, seeds from an aspen tree, which are called bracts.
Aspen is fairly common in Minnesota, but it's not the sort of thing that you'd see in someone's backyard.
The combination of an aspen seed and quackgrass told Dr. Chalawa that Patrick Walsh had been in a wooded area with high weeds. Dr. Chalawa didn't find any quackgrass or aspen bracts around Walsh's home. Dr. Chalawa discovered an area behind Pamela's shed that was untended and overgrown.
There was a lot of quackgrass in there. A number of other things too, but the quackgrass was, and it had clearly been flowering and fruiting in that woodlot.
She also found numerous aspen bracts. The area Dr. Chalawa identified was the exact spot where investigators found the murder weapons. She was convinced the specimens on Walsh's clothing were relatively fresh.
It wouldn't have attached itself to him for long periods of time, that it had to be something real recent in order to still be attached to his pants and stuck in his shoes.
But this was far from conclusive evidence. So police turned to a more traditional crime science. They analyzed the blood spatter at the crime scene. Walsh said he briefly shook Pam's body to see if she was alive before he ran from her room. But the blood on his clothing told a different story.
The staining was consistent with him coming in contact with a large amount of her blood on his pants leg, and stains consistent with spatter being found on him, which would indicate that he had been in close proximity when she was being stabbed.
And the size and shape of the spatter indicated the blood hit Walsh's pants from a blood-covered object that had been in motion. Investigators found similar blood spatter on the ceiling above the bed. These were perfectly circular, indicating the blood went straight up from the impact site.
The blood spatters give us a fairly good idea of where she may have been, and also the nature of the attack and how violent it was, how brutal it was, and how the knife was wielded.
I could look at the bloodstain patterns on the walls and determine the site where this impact took place. And this was right on the bed where she was found, and it indicated that that's exactly where she was attacked, on the bed.
She was stabbed in the bedroom, but shot elsewhere. There was a blood trail leading to the bedroom from the foyer, and bullets were found in the floor. This was where Pam Sweeney was shot.
We believe she was probably shot first in the lower levels of the house and dragged or carried upstairs and then stabbed in her bedroom, and died most likely from the stab wounds, not the gunshot wounds.
A blood stain on Walsh's pants was consistent with carrying a bleeding person. The forensic evidence also explained why Patrick Walsh called police to report the murder.
Patrick Walsh, in a panic, attempting to leave the scene of this killing, got in his pickup truck, miscalculated the driveway, and drove into the ditch. It's now 3 o'clock in the morning. He just murdered a young woman, and his pickup truck is hopelessly stuck in a ditch. What do you do?
A week before her death, Pam Sweeney told her family she couldn't find a set of house keys and was considering changing her locks. On the day of her murder, the keys resurfaced.
In the front seat of Patrick Walsh's black pickup truck, lo and behold, was Pamela Sweeney's stolen keys. So there was a direct connection. He never really explained how it got there.
Police believe Walsh stole the keys while he and Pam were at work. Proof, they said, that he planned the attack.
About a week before the killing, he had called up an ex-girlfriend and wanted to get his .22 caliber handgun returned. He had loaned it to her earlier. He wanted it back. He claimed it was for an elk hunting trip he was going to make, but that was, we found out later, not planned for 8 months down the road. So we believe he was actively engaged in planning this well before the day of the killing.
Inside Walsh's home, police found a number of .22 caliber shells. Those were sent to the FBI laboratory for neutron activation analysis.
They were able to identify that the lead compositions in the lead fragments that we found in Miss Sweeney's skull matched the lead compositions that were in the shells found in Mr. Walsh's apartment.
A few years earlier, Walsh was allegedly involved in 8 assault cases with other women and was a suspect in a previous murder. Prosecutors believe when Pam Sweeney rejected Walsh's advances, he sought revenge.
Our belief was that that just infuriated him. I think he took the view in his sick, twisted, psychotic mind, how dare you reject me when I have been doing all of these overtly kind acts for you? How dare you?
The evidence suggests Walsh entered Pam's home around 11 p.m. while Pam was asleep. But she must have heard someone inside and made her way to the hallway, where she confronted Walsh. There was an argument.
What's obvious is that you need to go. We keep rejecting.
Walsh fired twice into the floor, possibly to scare her. The next 4 shots hit Pamela Sweeney. Walsh carried her to the bedroom, then stabbed her to death, causing the blood spatter on the ceiling and on his clothes, then covered the body, a telltale clue that the killer was someone Pam knew. The evidence suggests Walsh stayed long enough to have a can of soda and grab a piece of candy. And when he went to his car, he left the candy wrapper on the seat beside him. But he accidentally drove his car into a ravine on the side of the driveway and couldn't get it out. Walsh then went back inside the house in the basement to look for something to get his car free. Then, a surprise. Pam's boyfriend, Larry Fleck, arrived after work. When Fleck discovered the murder, he ran to a neighbor's home for help. Walsh had to act quickly. He tried again to move his car, but couldn't, so he had to remove the evidence. The botanical evidence on his pants proved Walsh ran into the high grass and woods behind Pam's home to dump the murder weapons. When he returned, and knowing police would find his car, Walsh had no choice but to call police himself to make it appear as if he, too, had driven by and found Pam dead.
It was clear to me that the suspect had been in that woodlot. I don't see how he could have acquired that material any other way based on what the investigating officers knew of where he had been at the time of the crime and the previous 24 hours.
I guess the irony of it is, in going to that location and picking up those soil samples and the seeds from the local trees, he did put himself right at the very spot where he was trying to hide evidence that he didn't want to be connected to. So I think that's fairly significant.
7 months after Pamela Sweeney's death, Patrick Walsh went to trial for first-degree murder. The sheer volume of forensic evidence against him was overwhelming.
It's amazing when you're prosecuting a first-degree murder case and you have 1,000 puzzles and you're convinced that you have the right person. It is amazing how those pieces of the puzzle start to fall together, fitting perfectly.
Patrick Walsh was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison.
Patrick Walsh is a psychopath and perhaps the most dangerous man I have ever seen.
I favor the death penalty, but then again, from what I hear, what's happening to him once in a while in prison, I think he's probably got a harder time right now being alive than being dead.
The American executive was found dead in his car in Mexico. It looked like an accident until a forensic anthropologist found evidence of a chilling tale of fraud and deceit. 34-year-old Madison Rutherford had everything. He was ambitious, successful, happily married, and rich. He worked as a financial advisor in Connecticut with an uncanny ability to make money for his clients. He also managed money for his friends, like Brigida Beck.
I thought, since I am alone in this country, I thought it might be wise, if anything would happen to me, I thought I should have him as my executor.
By all accounts, Madison Rutherford and his wife Rennie lived lavishly and had expensive tastes. So it wasn't unusual for Madison to travel outside the United States pursuing his various interests.
Madison Rutherford and his wife had a penchant for various types of animals, including dogs. And part of the reason for supposedly going to Mexico was to obtain another exotic dog.
But a few days later, Mexican police found Rutherford's car in a ravine near Monterrey. It appeared that the car had swerved off the road and caught fire.
When they got there, the car was burnt beyond recognition. Everything was gone. And he opened up the driver door and found some bone fragments on the driver's side.
Inside, investigators found a medic alert pendant and a wristwatch. On the back of the watch, barely legible, was the inscription, "To Madison, love, Rennie." Also inside the car, the charred remains of a human. All that was left were some bones and teeth.
The cause of death was listed as total carbonization, meaning that it was just disintegrated from the heat.
When Rutherford's wife, Rennie, got the news, she was devastated.
As I came into the house, everybody was very long faces and sad, and I said, my goodness, I said, what happened? And this one person tells me that there was something terrible happened last night. Madison had an automobile accident and he got killed. Huh. I thought this was just awful. You know, I thought, my goodness, how terrible.
Fortuitously, Rennie said she could help investigators with the identification of her husband.
She proceeds to tell the insurance carriers that she has one of Rutherford's teeth that was left over from some type of dental work.
The tooth was extremely helpful, since its hard enamel shell often protects its inner core in a fire. That core contains an individual's DNA. But one of the forensic scientists in Mexico was suspicious, particularly when he examined the items recovered from the car.
The clasp of the medical alert bracelet was found in the open position. He thought that very odd. If somebody had died and that bracelet was on them, it would have been in the clasp position.
Investigators wondered whether the open clasp was a clue or simply an unimportant detail. Although there were some inconsistencies in the accident scene, the Mexican authorities ruled that Madison Rutherford had burned to death in a car accident.
Mexico wasn't pursuing this. There was no complainant. They had a body and a tragic death, and they've closed their case.
As a financial planner, Madison Rutherford had planned for his family's future in the event of his death. He had purchased an ample amount of life insurance.
Rutherford had two separate policies with two separate companies.
He's doubly insured. He's insured for $7 million, $4 million from one company and $3 million from another company.
As a routine matter, insurance companies like to make sure that a person who dies in a fire is, in fact, their client. The tooth given to them by Rutherford's wife could be used for DNA comparison, but it wasn't enough. So they sent the charred remains from the accident to one of the most respected forensic anthropologists in the world, Dr. William Bass. The best bone evidence was a small skull fragment and 4 teeth. Dr. Bass found something highly unusual about the skull fragment. The top outside of the skull wasn't burned.
Now, I got a lot of problems with it. If you're sitting in your car and it's on fire, the top of your skull is going to burn. It's going to burn up little pieces the size of a quarter. Now, here's a situation in which this doesn't happen.
Dr. Bass concluded there was only one way this could have happened. The victim's head had to be on the floor of the car at the time of the fire.
This tells me then that this is a stage scene, that this is not what happened in the normal crash of a car, that this is a body that has been placed in there in a position that it was not in before.
The skull fragment also provided clues about the victim's age. The human skull has 28 different plate-like bones. These bones come together in a process called fusion. Where they meet often looks like the stitching on clothes. As a person grows older, that stitching, or fusion, tends to disappear. In this case, it was almost non-existent.
It tells me that this is not a 34-year-old individual, that this is an individual maybe twice that, certainly 50 plus, because you don't normally get that much fusion in a 34-year-old white male.
The teeth also told a story. Sometimes different races have different shaped teeth. The ones recovered from the car had shovel-shaped incisors, not something associated with a white or Caucasian person.
These teeth had characteristics that are very specific to Mongoloid, this is Japanese, Chinese, or American Indian characteristics. These are what are called Mongoloid characteristics.
In addition, the teeth had large unfilled cavities, inconsistent with a wealthy man with access to the best in dental care. Dr. Bass informed the insurance companies of his findings.
I was told that the individual in his car was a 34-year-old white male. When I get through the analysis of the skeletal remains, that's not what I see. What is in that car is a 50 to 60 plus year old Mexican peasant who has, from a lower socioeconomic level, obviously be a peasant, but had done manual labor.
There were even more reasons to be skeptical, and more evidence that the scene might have been staged. Insurance investigators looked more closely at the medic alert pendant and the watch found in the ashes. If the body had burned almost to ashes, why did these items remain relatively intact? And witnesses said they saw a bicycle on the back of Rutherford's car earlier in the day, but no bicycle was found at the accident site. If it wasn't Madison Rutherford in the car, who was it? And where was Madison Rutherford? Forensic scientists were certain that Madison Rutherford was not the man killed in the car explosion in Mexico.
The focus switched not so much from we need more proof of death, we actually think he's alive. And now we want to find out where.
The authorities weren't the only ones concerned. His neighbor, Brigida Beck, had entrusted Madison Rutherford with her entire life savings, about $500,000, and she wanted to know where it was.
I was uncomfortable about the whole thing. I said, how is this going to play out? When do I get my money? When do I have a clear picture of this whole thing?
Brigida went to the Rutherfords' home and asked Rennie for answers.
She, said, I need to speak with you, and just don't make a sound. Please don't make a sound. Don't say anything. And I said, what's happening? So she leaned over kind of, and she whispered, he said, Madison is not dead. I said, what? And I said, what happened? Where is he? And she said, he's in hiding. I just lost it. I just thought this was just too much. I just walked away after a few moments, and I just cried. I just broke down. This was too much.
For Brigida, things soon got even stranger when Madison Rutherford showed up alive and well at her house.
This was all very bizarre. And how could he do that? And wouldn't he be afraid that he might get, picked up, but somebody might damage the house?
Rutherford told Brigida that his death had been staged for him by none other than the FBI. He said that organized crime members were after him because he had refused to launder drug money. He assured Brigida that her money was safe, but instructed her to draw on Brigida's entire life savings. She was penniless.
The agent said there is no money, and I thought maybe they made a mistake. This cannot be. And I realized I had nothing left. He had dismantled everything little by little. And I said, my God, what do I have in my pocket? Excuse me. I had exactly $500 in my checking account. That's what happened.
investigators had Rutherford's home under surveillance, Madison never appeared, but they finally got a break. A check of motor vehicles revealed that Madison owned a car that was being driven by a businessman in Massachusetts. His name was Thomas Bay Hamilton.
He works as a controller for a technology company. It's a fairly small company in downtown Boston.
As investigators were about to question Thomas Bay Hamilton, they got a call from Mexican authorities. They said they found a bag full of bloody clothes, and DNA tests concluded the blood was Madison Rutherford's. One year after Madison Rutherford's disappearance, Mexican police found a bag full of bloody clothing near the site of his car fire. The clothing showed numerous knife holes all over the chest area. DNA tests of that blood confirmed it belonged to Madison Rutherford. But this time, investigators didn't believe it. They were convinced the man they were following in Boston, Thomas Bay Hamilton, was in fact Madison Rutherford.
Stu Robinson, the agent who arrested him in Boston, has these fingerprints with him. When Thomas Hamilton is arrested and we roll his fingerprints, they're the same prints. This is our man. This is Madison Rutherford.
The FBI searched his apartment and found books on how to change your identity and travel brochures on Mexico. And they found one item that appeared to tie up the case once and for all.
In the Boston apartment, we find an actual to-do list. It says goals for the year 1999/2000. And the very top thing is collect $7 million from the insurance company. So that was a pretty good clue. We kind of tied them together with just that one piece of paper.
Right after he was arrested, Rutherford called his wife from prison.
This call may be recorded or monitored. The first thing is we have to keep you from getting picked up for anything they think you did which you didn't. Okay? You got to go somewhere where they don't know the address. They'll be for you tomorrow morning. They'll get an arrest warrant by then.
What happens to everything?
I don't know. Let's do this piece by piece.
I'm shaking.
I know, but we got to get you out of here.
Rennie originally denied she had anything to do with the attempted fraud. But when investigators showed her evidence that her husband was dating other women while Madison was in Mexico, he drove to a desolate graveyard in the Mexican countryside and removed a body.
Apparently, he'd found a cemetery in Mexico near to where the crash site was, went in to an above-ground tomb, took off the top of a casket, and took out the corpse out of the casket.
And started the fire. When the flames subsided, he threw in his medic alert bracelet and watch, so they would survive the blaze and help identify the corpse. He then took off on his bicycle. True position of the body in the car, and that the bones would reveal the man's race and age.
Madison Rutherford thought of every detail, but he never thought of the bone doctor.
Investigators, looking for a motive, soon discovered that Rutherford had gambled heavily in stocks and lost.
He saw himself as a financial guru, and he tried to play the stock market as a day trader. He lost a considerable amount of money in the 1995-1996 period, and I think that he saw that faking his death and getting insurance proceeds was a way of recouping losses and providing himself with a nest egg for future investments.
Investigators learned that Rutherford used a number of aliases in the past. All were presidential-sounding names: Madison, Rutherford, and now Hamilton. His real name was John Sankey.
I thought it was ironic and quite humorous that he was arrested on Election Day on November 7th, 2000. So this man with all these presidential-sounding names didn't get a chance to vote for the next president. People think that the FBI doesn't have a sense of humor, but I think this proves that we do.
When faced with the evidence against him, Madison Rutherford pleaded guilty to fraud. Federal sentencing guidelines limit his sentence to 5 years. His wife, Rennie, was sentenced to 18 months in prison for her part in the attempted fraud. Since Rutherford had withdrawn $500,000 from Brigida Beck's accounts, she has nothing left. She confronted him during a telephone conversation while he was in prison.
Can I ask you one question? We never talked about my finances. What do you...
Let's talk next week.
Why next week?
Only because I can't do anything. Let's talk next week and go through stuff.
Because that's, I want to know a few things.
Okay. Yeah, let's talk next
never
week.
really talked about it.
Okay. Let's talk next week.
He ruined my life. He ruined my security. He couldn't care less. My wonderful friend turned into a monster to me. And I hope that anybody that would find themselves in the same or similar situation, be careful who you so-called friends.
No criminal charges could be brought against Rutherford for embezzlement since Brigida had given him power.
Virginia, 1985. Cold case cracked. One forgotten file breaks the case. The file had been sitting in a basement for 39 years. No one had opened it. No one had requested it. No one even remembered why it existed. Then, on a gray November morning in 2024, a county records clerk found it behind a row of damaged evidence boxes. The cardboard was warped. The ink on the label had faded almost completely. Only 3 things could still be read. A date, 1985, and a name, Emily Carter. Inside was a photograph of a young woman smiling at the camera, 23 years old. Brown hair, blue eyes, a small scar above her left eyebrow. Emily had disappeared from the quiet Virginia town of Millhaven on September 14th, still 1985. For 39 years, her family had been told the same thing. There was not enough evidence. No body, no confirmed suspect, no reliable witness, no reason to believe she had not simply left. But the forgotten file contained something the original investigators had never seen. A handwritten note. 3 words. She was followed. And beneath those words was a license plate number. A license plate that had never appeared in the official case report. The discovery reopened one of Virginia's oldest missing person mysteries. And almost immediately, investigators realized something was wrong. The original investigation had not simply failed. It had missed evidence. Important evidence. Evidence that had been sitting less than 50 feet from the detective's original desk. Emily Carter had disappeared on a Saturday night. She worked as a receptionist at the Millhaven Community Clinic and lived with her mother in a small white house near the edge of town. She was not known to take risks. She did not use drugs. She had no history of running away. She was close to her family. She had plans to attend nursing school the following year. On September 14th, she finished work at 6:10 p.m. A co-worker watched her leave. Emily waved. She said she was going to meet a friend for dinner. That was the last confirmed sighting. Her car was found the following morning near an abandoned railway crossing. The driver's door was unlocked. The headlights were off. The keys were missing. Her purse was inside. Her wallet was inside. Her identification was inside. Her coat was folded neatly on the passenger seat. The scene confused investigators immediately. If Emily had left voluntarily, why abandon the car? If she had been attacked, why was there no blood? If someone had forced her from the vehicle, why were there no signs of a struggle? The only unusual detail was a small scratch on the driver's side door. It looked fresh. At first, investigators assumed it meant nothing. That assumption would haunt the case for decades. Emily's mother, Margaret Carter, reported her missing at 7:15 the next morning. She called hospitals, friends, relatives, police. By noon, volunteers were searching the railway track. By evening, hundreds of flyers had been printed. The town changed overnight. People locked their doors. Parents stopped allowing children to walk alone. Women stopped using the railway shortcut. Rumors spread. Some said Emily had been abducted. Others said she had met someone secretly. One man claimed he saw a dark sedan near the cross. Another said he heard a woman's voice around midnight. Neither witness could provide enough detail to identify anyone. Then investigators found Emily's last known phone call. In 1985, there were no digital records showing location, but the local telephone company retained billing log. Emily had called a number at 6:42 p.m. The call lasted less than 2 minutes. The number belonged to a man named Thomas Reed. Reed was 30 years old. He worked at a nearby auto parts store. He had dated Emily briefly several months earlier. Investigators questioned him. Reed admitted speaking with her. He said Emily had called because she wanted to return a book. He claimed she sounded normal. He said they agreed to meet the following week. Not that night. Police checked his story. A co-worker said Reed had been at the store until 7 p.m. Another witness remembered seeing him leave shortly afterward. Reed became the first serious person of interest, but there was no evidence connecting him to Emily's disappearance. His vehicle was searched. Nothing. His apartment was searched. Nothing. His clothing was examined. Nothing. After several weeks, investigators moved on. The case began to cool. Then, 2 months later, a hunter discovered a woman's scarf near a wooded drainage ditch approximately 6 miles from the railway crossing. Margaret identified it. It belonged to Emily. The discovery transformed the case. Investigators searched the surrounding wood. They found no body, no clothing, no weapon, no footprints, only the scarf. The area had been exposed to heavy rain. Whatever evidence might have existed had probably been destroyed. The case remained open. Then it stalled. Years passed. 1986, 1987, 1988. Every year, Margaret called investigators. Every year, she asked the same question. Have you found my daughter? The answer was always no. Emily's photograph remained on the wall at the police station. Eventually, younger officers stopped recognizing her. The original detective retired. The case file was moved, then moved again, and eventually, part of it disappeared, or so everyone believed. In 2024, the records clerk found the forgotten file. Inside was the handwritten note. She was followed, and beneath it, the license plate. Virginia plate K4179. Investigators entered the number into an old vehicle database. The result was shocking. The plate belonged to a dark blue 1978 Chevrolet sedan, registered to a man named Robert Hale. Hale had never been interviewed. His name did not appear in the original case report. He had lived less than 3 miles from the railway crossing, and he had died in 1993. Investigators searched his history. Hale had worked as a night security guard. His job required him to patrol warehouses along the railway corridor. That meant he had access to the exact area where Emily's car was found. But there was more. Hale's vehicle had been reported for repairs on September 16, still 1985, 2 days after Emily disappeared. The repair order mentioned damage to the front bumper. The mechanic wrote, "Impact with unknown object." The invoice was still preserved. Investigators located the mechanic. He was 84. He remembered the car. He remembered Hale. And he remembered something else. Hale had told him he struck a deer, but the damage was inconsistent with a deer. The bumper was damaged at a low angle. The mechanic had questioned him. Hale became angry. He told him to fix it and forget it. The forgotten file had just produced its first major break, but investigators still needed to know why Hale had been near Emily's car. They searched his former residence. The house had been demolished years earlier, but property records showed that Hale had rented a storage garage behind an old hardware store. The garage still existed. Inside were rusted tools, newspapers, furniture, and boxes. Investigators opened every container. Most were worthless. Then, beneath a broken workbench, they found a metal box. Inside were photographs. Dozens. Some were landscapes. Some showed railway tracks. Others showed women. Young women. Always from a distance. Always without their knowledge. Investigators laid them across the table. Emily was there. The photograph had been taken 3 days before she disappeared. She was walking outside the clinic. Another showed her entering her house. Another showed her sitting inside her car. Then investigators found a final photograph. Emily standing beside Thomas Reed. But Reed had claimed he had not seen her that week. The photograph proved he had lied. The case suddenly had two men, Reed, Hale, and a hidden connection. Hale's photographs were dated. Most of the women had dates written on the back. Several had disappeared. Investigators began comparing the name. One woman had vanished in 1983, another in 1984, another in 1985. The pattern was unmistakable. Emily might not have been the first, and she might not have been the last. Then investigators found a photograph of Emily taken on September 14th, the date she disappeared. She was standing outside the Blue Lantern restaurant. In the reflection of the window behind her was the dark blue Chevrolet, Hale's car. Emily had been watched that night. Someone had followed her, and the handwritten note in the forgotten file had been correct. But investigators still did not know who had written it. The handwriting analysis produced a surprising result. The note did not belong to the original lead detective. It did not belong to any detective assigned to Emily's case. It belonged to a patrol officer, a young officer named Daniel Mercer. Mercer had died in 1998. His personnel file showed he had been one of the first officers at the railway crossing. He had photographed Emily's car. He had collected the scarf. He had interviewed witnesses. And he had written the note. But the note was never included in the official report. Why? Because Mercer had apparently discovered something he was not supposed to know. Investigators searched his old personnel record. One page was missing. Another had been removed from the file. Then they found a surviving copy in a retirement archive. It contained a statement Mercer had written 3 days after Emily disappeared. He claimed he had seen Robert Hale near the railway crossing at approximately 11:30 p.m. Hale had been standing beside Emily's car. Mercer approached him. Hale said he was helping a stranded motorist, but Emily's car was already empty. Mercer asked where the woman was. Hale said she had walked away. Mercer did not believe him. He wrote down the license plate, K4179, the same number found in the forgotten file. Then Mercer reported the encounter to his supervisor. The report disappeared. The supervisor's name was Captain William Stroud. Stroud had been in charge of the investigation. He retired in 1991. He died in 2007, and his name appeared in another document inside the forgotten file. A handwritten note. One sentence. Captain says leave Hale alone. The case had just changed again. Someone had deliberately protected Robert Hale. The question was why. And when investigators searched Hale's old employment records, they found the answer hidden in a place nobody had looked since 1985. Hale had not merely been a night security guard. He had also worked private security for a local transportation company. That company handled freight along the railway corridor. The owner was William Stroud, the same man who supervised Emily's investigation, the same man who ordered officers to leave Hale alone, the same man who controlled the case. Suddenly, the original investigation looked different. Emily's disappearance had not simply been mishandled. Someone had interfered. The evidence had been redirected. The witnesses had been ignored. And the man who followed Emily had been protected by the person responsible for finding her. But there was one more discovery, a second handwritten note. It was dated September 18th, Sill, 1985, 4 days after Emily disappeared. It contained only one sentence. She saw the transfer. Investigators did not understand what it meant until they examined the railway records. On September 14th, Sill, 1985, a freight shipment had arrived at the Millhaven rail yard. The cargo manifest listed industrial equipment, but the shipping company later confirmed the containers had been empty. Someone had used the railway to move something illegally, and Emily may have seen it. The photograph recovered from Hale's garage showed the rail yard in the background. Several trucks were parked beside the track. One belonged to Stroud's transportation company. Another belonged to Hale's security employer. and one had no license plate. Investigators enlarged the image. Inside the truck cab was a man. The face was barely visible, but the jacket was clear. A dark uniform with a silver stripe. The same jacket described by the witness who saw a man following Emily. The investigation had found its first true connection. Emily had not simply vanished. She had witnessed something at the railway yard. Someone followed her. Someone took her car. Someone removed evidence. And someone inside the police department made sure the investigation went nowhere. The forgotten file had cracked open a mystery that had survived nearly 4 decades. But the most disturbing discovery was still waiting. Inside the last folder was a photograph Mercer had taken at the railway crossing. The photograph showed Emily's abandoned car. The driver's door was open. The interior was visible. And reflected in the side mirror was a second vehicle, a dark blue Chevrolet, Hale's car. But behind it stood a police cruiser, Unit 12. The cruiser assigned to Captain William Stroud, the man who ordered investigators to leave Hale alone, the man who controlled the case, the man who had never admitted being at the scene. The cold case had finally reached the point where coincidence was no longer believable. Emily Carter had been followed. Her car had been found. Her scarf had been recovered. Her photograph had been hidden. The license plate had been erased from the official record. A police officer had documented the truth, and someone had buried it. For 39 years, the town of Millhaven believed Emily had simply vanished into the darkness. Now the evidence suggested something much worse. She had been watched. She had been followed. And the people who were supposed to find her may have known exactly where she went. The forgotten file had broken the case open, but it had not yet revealed the final destination. And somewhere inside the old railway records was the answer to the question investigators had been asking since 1985. Where did Emily Carter go after she left the railway crossing? The answer would begin with a freight train that arrived at 12:17 a.m. And on that train was something nobody had ever reported missing. At 12:17 a.m., the freight train rolled through Millhaven without stopping. Its headlights cut through the darkness. Its wheels screamed against the rail. And hidden among the cargo cars was a shipment that officially did not exist. Investigators discovered the train movement decades later, buried inside a transportation ledger that had been almost destroyed by water damage. The document showed that one freight car had been added to the train after the original manifest was finalized. Car 4817. No cargo description. No declared destination. No registered sender. Just a handwritten authorization. The signature belonged to William Stroud. That discovery gave investigators a new timeline. Emily Carter disappeared sometime after 11:30 p.m. The freight train passed at 12:17. And somewhere inside those 47 minutes, investigators believed Emily had been moved from the railway crossing. The question was how. The old photograph gave them a possible answer. The dark blue Chevrolet appeared behind Emily's abandoned car. Stroud's police cruiser was behind Hale's vehicle. And beyond both vehicles, near the service road, stood a freight loading platform. The platform had been demolished years earlier, but archived engineering plans showed that it connected directly to the rail yard. A person could move from the road to the tracks without being seen from the main highway. In 1985, the area was poorly lit. There were no security cameras, no automatic gates, no electronic access logs, only one night guard, Robert Hale, and one supervising official, William Stroud, the same 2 men whose names kept appearing around the disappearance. Investigators searched the old rail company's employee records. Hale had signed into work at 8 p.m. He was supposed to remain at the warehouse until 6 a.m., but the log showed something strange. At 11:18 p.m., Hale left the warehouse. At 11:21, he returned. At 11:25, he left again. The second departure was never explained. Then came another discovery. The railway company kept fuel records for its maintenance vehicles. At 11:31 p.m., a company truck was refueled. The driver's signature was Robert Hale. The vehicle was a small utility truck. Its cargo area was enclosed. It could easily have transported a person. Investigators found the truck in an old photograph. It was parked beside Emily's car. The image was grainy, but the shape matched. The vehicle had a dent above the rear wheel. The same dent appeared in maintenance records. The timeline was tightening. Emily had been at the railway crossing. Hale arrived. Stroud's cruiser followed. A company truck was present. Then the freight train arrived. And afterward, Emily was gone. But investigators still had no body, no direct evidence of murder, no confession, only a growing chain of circumstances. Then forensic specialists revisited Emily's abandoned car. The original photographs had been preserved. Modern enhancement revealed something the detectives of 1985 could not have seen: a faint smear on the rear door. At the time, investigators had assumed it was dirt. Digital enhancement showed a partial handprint. The print was incomplete, but enough ridge detail survived to compare it with archived fingerprints. The match was Robert Hale. His hand had touched the rear door. That alone did not prove murder. But the position mattered. Hale had not touched the driver's door. He had touched the rear compartment. The same compartment investigators believed could have been used to transport someone. Then another print appeared. This one was on the inside of the passenger door. It belonged to William Stroud. The police captain had touched Emily's car. Neither man had reported doing so. Neither had mentioned it in his statement. And neither explained why. The case now contained 2 silent fingerprints from 2 men who had denied meaningful involvement. The forgotten file had become a roadmap. Investigators followed it backward. They reviewed every police report from September 14th through September 30th, SIL, 1985. One report was missing. Incident number 85, 441. The number appeared in the dispatch log, but the report itself was gone. The dispatch entry read, 11:43 p.m., officer requested at rail crossing. No reason. No officer name. No conclusion. The responding unit was listed as Unit 12, Stroud's cruiser. That meant Stroud was at the scene before the freight train arrived, and he had never mentioned the call. Investigators searched the county archive for duplicate dispatch sheets. One survived. The original operator had written a brief note in the margin. Female involved. Possible disturbance. That was the first official record suggesting Emily was still alive at 11:43 p.m. She had not disappeared hours earlier. She had been at the crossing. She had encountered someone, and someone had called police. But the most disturbing detail was the time. 11:43. Only 34 minutes before the freight train arrived. Investigators located the dispatch. She had died in 2011, but her daughter had preserved her mother's notebooks. The notebook from September 14th, SIL, 1985, contained a personal entry. The dispatcher had written that night because the call disturbed her. She remembered hearing a woman crying. She remembered a man shouting. She remembered the phrase, "Give me the film." That sentence changed everything. Emily had photographs. Someone knew. Someone wanted the film. The evidence was not about a random disappearance. It was about what Emily had witnessed. Investigators returned to her apartment. They searched her surviving belongings. Her camera was missing. Her mother had always assumed Emily took it with her. But the film recovered from Patricia Lowell's envelope had come from a different camera. The camera itself was never found. That meant Emily may have carried a second roll, possibly the most important one. The investigators wondered what she had photographed. They searched the railway yard records. A company employee had made a handwritten note on September 15th, missing inspection camera. The camera belonged to the transportation company. It had been stored in the yard office. Someone had taken it the night Emily disappeared. The company never reported the theft to police. The camera was later found damaged. No film. No explanation. The evidence suggested Emily may have taken photographs using the company's equipment. Perhaps she had entered the yard. Perhaps she had discovered something inside the freight container. And perhaps someone had seen her. Then investigators found the cargo manifest. Car 4817. The mysterious freight car. The one added after the official manifest was completed. Its destination was Richmond. But the train's original route showed something different. The car was supposed to be removed in Millhaven. It was not. Instead, it continued east. That meant someone had altered the train's route. Someone wanted the car moved. The investigators contacted the railroad company. The original car numbering system had changed, but archived maintenance records showed that car 4817 had once been used to transport industrial chemicals. Its interior was sealed. Its doors required special tools. If someone wanted to hide something inside, it would have been an ideal place. Investigators searched the surviving inspection record. One line had been crossed out. Beneath it was a note, "Clean before departure." The handwriting matched William Stroud. The case had now connected Stroud directly to the freight operation, but investigators still needed to know what was inside the car. They located the retired rail inspector who had examined it in 1985. His name was Arthur Mills. He was 92. When investigators showed him the manifest, he became quiet. Then he said something unexpected. That car wasn't carrying chemicals. What was it carrying? Mills shook his head. I was told not to ask. Who told you? Stroud. Mills remembered seeing Hale near the car. He remembered another man. And he remembered a woman. He could not see her face, but he remembered her voice. She was crying. Mills said he heard someone say, she saw everything. Investigators asked whether the woman could have been Emily. Mills closed his eyes. I think so. The statement was not enough for a conviction, but it was enough to change the timeline. Emily may have been alive at the rail yard. She may have been inside or near car 4817, and she may have been moved onto the train. The next discovery came from a completely unexpected source. A retired railway photographer named Leonard Shaw had spent years photographing freight trains. He had kept thousands of negatives. Among them was a photograph taken at 12:14 a.m. on September 15th, still 1985, 3 minutes before the train departed. The image showed the loading platform, the utility truck, Hale's Chevrolet, Stroud's police cruiser, and car 4817. But something else appeared. A person standing beside the open freight door. The photograph was taken from a distance. The face was invisible, but the person's clothing was clear. A light-colored jacket, dark trousers, and a small silver object around the neck. Emily had worn a silver necklace that night. Her mother remembered it. It had never been recovered. The necklace appeared in photographs from earlier that evening, and now it seemed to be visible in the final photograph taken before the train left. The investigators enlarged the image. The figure was standing inside the doorway. One hand appeared to be gripping the side of the car. The other was raised. The photograph could not prove identity, but the timing was devastating. At 12:14, someone matching Emily's clothing was beside the freight car. At 12:17, the train departed. At 12:20, it passed beyond Millhaven, and Emily was never seen again. The investigators traced the train. The route led toward Richmond, then toward a distribution yard. A car 4817 did not remain attached to the train. At 3:42 a.m., it was detached. Its destination changed. A small industrial siting in eastern Virginia. The siting belonged to a company called Dominion Recovery. That company had one owner, William Stroud. Investigators were stunned. Stroud had secretly owned the destination facility. The freight car had been diverted to his private industrial property, and according to records, it arrived at 5:06, less than 6 hours after Emily disappeared. Investigators searched the property record. The facility had been demolished in 1996, but old aerial photographs showed a large concrete storage building. Beneath it was a basement. The basement was sealed after a chemical leak in 1991. When investigators searched the surviving construction records, they found a notation. Access restricted. No reason. No inspection details. Nothing else. Then, in 2025, investigators obtained a demolition report. The report contained a photograph of the basement before destruction. Along the far wall were dozens of metal storage cabinets. One cabinet had a faded number, 17. The same number that appeared in another document connected to Emily. Subject 17. Investigators now believe the number referred not to Emily alone, but to a series. Women. Witnesses. People who had seen something. The investigation expanded beyond one disappearance, and with it came a horrifying possibility. Emily may have been part of a larger pattern. Investigators searched missing person records across Virginia from 1979 through 1990. 23 women had disappeared near transportation corridor. 7 had vanished within 50 miles of Millhaven, 4 had last been seen near rail lines. 3 had known connections to transportation companies. 2 had been identified in photographs recovered from Hale's garage. The pattern was too strong to ignore, but the evidence remained incomplete. The families of those women were contacted. Old photographs were compared. DNA samples were requested. One family provided a photograph of a woman named Laura Bennett. She disappeared in 1983. Her photograph had been in Hale's garage. Another woman, Susan Price, disappeared in 1984. Her photograph was there too. A third woman, Natalie Ross, vanished in 1985. Her photograph was there. Emily was not alone. She was one of several women who had been watched, but investigators still did not know what. Then they found the notebook. Robert Hale had kept a small black notebook. It contained dates, locations, initials, and numbers. The final page contained a list of women. Next to each name was a code. Emily's name appeared beside 17. Laura Bennett was 12. Susan Price was 14. Natalie Ross was 16. The numbers were sequential. That meant Emily was not the beginning, and she was not the end. The final name was 18. No last name, just a first name. Mary. Investigators searched missing person databases. Hundreds of women named Mary had disappeared, but one case matched the date. Mary Collins, 21 years old, disappeared from Eastern Virginia in October 1985, 1 month after Emily. Her photograph was also in Hale's garage. The cold case had just become a series, and suddenly, the forgotten file no longer looked like an isolated piece of evidence. It was the first crack in something much larger. The people involved had kept records. They had numbered women. They had photographed them. They had followed them. And they had moved evidence through the railway system. Emily had discovered the operation. Then she vanished. But one question still remained. Why did Stroud keep the original photographs? Why did Hale photograph the women? And what exactly was happening inside the freight cars? The answer was hidden in one final document. A maintenance report dated September 15th, SIL 1985. At the bottom was a handwritten instruction. Do not open until Richmond. Underneath was another line. The witness will be transferred. Investigators stared at those words. The witness. Not the body. Not the victim. The witness. Emily may have still been alive when the train left Millhaven. And if that was true, the timeline of her disappearance had been wrong for 39 years. The town had spent decades believing she vanished near the railway crossing. But the evidence now suggested she had been transported away from Virginia's quiet little town before anyone realized she was gone. And the person who ordered the transfer was not Robert Hale, not William Stroud, not Thomas Reed. The signature at the bottom belonged to someone whose name had never appeared in Emily's case file. A man who had been standing at the railway yard that night. A man who had access to car 4817. A man whose identity had been erased from the original investigation. His name was Samuel Vane. And when investigators searched his records, they discovered something terrifying. Vane had worked for the railroad. He had disappeared from the payroll on September 16th, SIL 1985, 2 days after Emily disappeared. No resignation. No termination. No explanation. Just gone. For 39 years, nobody had asked where he went. Now investigators had a reason, and the forgotten file had finally given them a direction. East. Toward Richmond. Toward the abandoned industrial property. Toward the sealed basement. Toward the freight car that carried a witness into the darkness, and possibly toward the place where Emily Carter's story had ended, or where it had truly begun. At 5:06 a.m., car 4817 arrived at the Dominion Recovery sighting. The railway records said nothing unusual happened. No emergency. No accident. No police call. No missing cargo. The train arrived. The car was detached. The crew left. And by sunrise, the sighting was quiet. But the newly recovered documents told a different story. Someone had been waiting. A handwritten entry in Samuel Vane's employment ledger showed that he arrived at the facility at 4:58 a.m., 8 minutes before the freight car stopped. He was not scheduled to work. He was not listed as part of the train crew. He had no official reason to be there. Yet his signature appeared on the receiving document. Beside it were 2 words: private transfer. Investigators stared at the document for several minutes. Then they searched the property records for Dominion Recovery. The company had officially handled industrial waste, but its financial records showed something stranger. Almost none of its income came from waste disposal. Most of the money came from transportation contracts, and many of those contracts were connected to companies controlled by William Stroud, the same man who had commanded the police investigation into Emily Carter, the same man who had appeared at the railway crossing, the same man whose fingerprints were found inside Emily's car, the same man who had signed the mysterious freight authorization. The pieces were beginning to form a pattern. Emily had not simply been taken from the road. She had been moved through a system: police, railway, private security, industrial property. And every part of that system seemed to lead back to Stroud. But investigators still needed to know what happened after car 4817 arrived. The old aerial photographs showed a loading platform behind the Dominion Recovery Building. A concrete ramp connected it to the basement. The ramp had one entrance. No windows. No public access. In 1991, the entrance had been sealed after the chemical leak, but investigators found a construction invoice dated September 1985. It listed modifications to the basement: a reinforced door, new ventilation, a drainage system, and something called a secure observation room. There was no explanation for the room, no public record, no inspection report, nothing. The construction company had gone bankrupt in 1994. Most of its files were destroyed, but one former employee was still alive. His name was George Mallory. He was 90. When investigators showed him the blueprint, he immediately recognized the building. Then he pointed to the secure observation room. That wasn't for chemicals. What was it for? Mallory hesitated. People. The room had been designed with a narrow window overlooking the basement. Mallory said he had been told it was for monitoring workers, but he never saw workers inside. He saw guards, and once he saw a woman, young, frightened. Mallory could not remember her face, but he remembered something she said. She asked for her mother. Investigators asked when this happened. Mallory said sometime in September 1985. The room suddenly became critical, because if his memory was accurate, Emily had survived the railway transfer. She had been alive after car 4817 reached Dominion Recovery, and someone had held her there. But Mallory's memory was not enough. Investigators needed physical evidence. They searched the demolished facility record. Most documents were gone. Then they found a strange photograph in the county planning archive. It had been taken during an inspection in 1986. The basement was visible. The secure observation room was visible. And on the floor was a small object: a woman's shoe. Investigators compared the style with photographs of Emily. The shoes Emily wore on the night she disappeared were dark leather flat. The shoe in the photograph appeared identical, but the image was too blurred to establish certainty. Then forensic experts enhanced it. A small mark appeared on the side, a crescent-shaped scratch. Margaret Carter had described that scratch years earlier. Emily had damaged one of her shoes shortly before disappearing. The shoe in the photograph had the same mark. The evidence suggested Emily had been inside the basement. But there was another problem. The photograph was taken in 1986, months after her disappearance. If the shoe belonged to Emily, why was it still there? And if Emily had been held there, what happened to her? Investigators searched every available record from September 1985 through January 1986. They found repeated deliveries to Dominion Recovery: food, water, medical supplies. None were listed under employee use. One delivery occurred every Tuesday. The order contained enough food for 3 people. The recipient was Samuel Vane. The first delivery was September 17, 3 days after Emily vanished. The final delivery was December 3rd. Then they stopped. That 12-week period became one of the most disturbing discoveries in the investigation. For nearly 3 months, someone had been receiving supplies at the sealed facility. 3-person quantities. No registered workers. No documented residents. No explanation. Investigators wondered if Emily had been held there. But there was another possibility. Perhaps other people were inside. The numbered photographs from Hale's garage suddenly took on a new meaning. Emily was subject 17. Mary Collins was 18. What if the numbers represented victims? What if Dominion Recovery had been used to hold them? The investigators searched the facility's old electricity records. The basement consumed unusually high power during September, October, and November 1985. Heating, lighting, ventilation. Something had been operating continuously. Then, in December, consumption dropped. The system was shut down. The timing was chilling. The final supply delivery arrived December 3rd. 5 days later, the basement's power usage returned to normal. Whatever had been happening there ended. Investigators searched for records of Samuel Vane after December 1985. Nothing. He had vanished. His apartment was abandoned. His bank account closed. His employment records ended. It was as if he had disappeared from the world. But then they found his death certificate. Samuel Vane died in 2001. Not in Virginia. Not in the United States. He died in a small town in Ontario, Canada. The cause was listed as natural. He had lived under a different name. Investigators contacted Canadian authorities. The name on his death certificate was Samuel Vale. Same birth date. Same fingerprints. Same man. He had spent 16 years living under another identity. Why? Investigators searched his Canadian property record. The house had been sold after his death. The new owner had kept the basement storage room intact. Inside was an old steel filing cabinet. The drawers were locked. When investigators opened them, they found documents, railway schedules, Virginia maps, photographs, and a letter. The letter was dated December 1985. It contained only one sentence. The girl is gone. The file is closed. There was no signature, but the paper carried a company watermark, Dominion Recovery. The investigators returned to Virginia with the documents. The investigation now had evidence that someone had deliberately moved Emily out of the local area, but they still did not know where. Then they found something inside Vane's Canadian file, a map. It showed a route from Millhaven to Richmond, then south, then west. The route ended at an abandoned property in West Virginia, a place called Blackwater Station. Blackwater Station had once been a coal transfer facility. By 1985, it was almost completely abandoned. There were no regular trains, no workers, no reason for a transportation company to use it. Yet Vane's map contained a date, September 18th, Sill 1985, and beside it, 17. Investigators contacted West Virginia authorities. The old property still existed. The main building had collapsed, but an underground storage tunnel remained. A search team entered. The tunnel was dark, wet, unstable. The walls were covered with old markings, names, dates, numbers. Some had been carved into the concrete. The investigators photographed everything. Then they saw one number, 17. Below it was a name, Emily. The team stopped. The name was not modern graffiti. The concrete around it was weathered. The carving appeared decades old. For the first time, investigators had physical evidence placing Emily at Blackwater Station, but they still could not determine whether she had been alive when she arrived. Then they discovered a second marking, M, and beneath it, 18. Mary Collins, the same woman whose photograph had been found in Hale's garage, the same woman who disappeared 1 month after Emily. Investigators began to realize what the numbers meant. They were not police case numbers. They were not shipping codes. They were identifiers, subjects, women. And the sequence continued. The tunnel contained at least 5 numbers, but only 2 names were readable, Emily, Mary. The remaining identities were gone. Investigators expanded the search. A wall section was removed. Behind it was a narrow chamber. Inside were blankets, rusting restraints, empty medicine bottles, and dozens of photographs. The photographs showed women. Some were smiling. Some were crying. Some appeared to be asleep. One photograph showed Emily. She was sitting against a wall. Her hair was disheveled. She wore the same light-colored jacket seen in the railway photograph. Her face was turned toward the camera. She was alive. Investigators knew immediately what that meant. Emily Carter survived the night of September 14th. She survived the railway transfer. She survived the trip to Blackwater Station. Someone photographed her there. But the photograph was dated September 21st, Sill 1985. 1 week after her disappearance. The case had just become something much darker. Emily was alive for at least 7 days after she vanished. Her family had been searching. Police had been investigating. Newspapers had been publishing her photograph. And all the while, she was being held underground. The photograph contained another clue. On the wall behind Emily was a small chalkboard. Written across it was a date, September 22nd. The following day, someone had planned something. Investigators searched the chamber for more photographs. They found one dated September 22nd. Emily was not in it. Another dated September 23rd. Still no Emily. September 24th. Nothing. Then September 25th. A photograph showed an empty chair, the chair where Emily had been sitting. The investigator holding the photograph noticed something on the floor, a small silver chain. Emily's necklace. It had been placed beside the chair. The necklace had never been found. The photograph proved it existed, and it raised a terrifying possibility. Emily had been moved again, or she had died. The investigators searched the tunnel for human remains. They found nothing, but they discovered a drainage channel leading deeper underground. The channel had been recently reinforced in 1985. Someone had altered the tunnel after Emily arrived. The construction records were non-existent. The concrete was different from the surrounding wall. Investigators drilled through it. Behind the wall was another passage. The passage led toward an old railway maintenance tunnel. The tunnel had been abandoned for decades, but its tracks still connected to the main line. A person could have moved through it without being seen. The route ended near a small service platform. The platform was not marked on modern maps, but it appeared on a 1985 railway plan, and beside the platform was a handwritten note, transfer point. The investigation now had a possible explanation. Emily had been moved from Millhaven to Dominion Recovery, then transferred again to Blackwater Station. The operation had been designed to keep her location hidden. But why? What did she know? Investigators returned to the photographs. Emily's expression in the September 21st image was important. She was looking directly at the camera, not frightened, not confused, angry. And in her right hand was a small piece of paper. Forensic specialists enhanced the image. 3 words became visible. I know everything. The message appeared deliberate. Emily knew someone was photographing her. She wanted them to understand that she knew what was happening, and perhaps she knew she might never leave. The final photograph of Emily was dated September 25th. She was standing. The jacket was gone. The necklace was gone. Her hair was shorter. She looked exhausted. Behind her was a door. On the door was a number. 4. Investigators searched the tunnel for door 4. They found it sealed. Behind it was a narrow room. Empty, except for one thing. A wall covered with scratches. Dozens of them. Some were shallow. Some were deep. And near the bottom was a final message. 3 words. Tell my mother. The handwriting was identified as Emily. For Margaret Carter, it would become the most devastating discovery of her life. Her daughter had been alive. She had been imprisoned. She had known she might die. And she had tried to leave one final message. But the investigation had not yet found her remains. Without them, prosecutors would face another problem. How could they prove what happened after September 25th? The answer came from a photograph found behind the door. A photograph nobody had noticed because it was stuck beneath the floorboard. It showed a group of men standing beside a vehicle. Robert Hale, William Stroud, Samuel Vane, and another man, Thomas Reed, Emily's former boyfriend. The man who had told police he had not seen her that week. The man whose photograph had appeared in Hale's garage. The man who had lied about his whereabouts. All 4 men were standing together. And in the background was the entrance to Blackwater Station. The date on the photograph was September 26th. Sill 1985. 12 days after Emily disappeared, the case had finally found the missing connection. Thomas Reed had not been a minor suspect. He had been part of the operation. He had helped locate Emily. He had helped gain her trust. He had been the reason she left work that night. And he had lied from the beginning. Investigators searched Reed's history. He had left Virginia in 1987. He changed his name. He moved to Tennessee, then Arizona, then disappeared from public records. But unlike Vane, he was not dead. He was alive. 71 years old, living under another name. And when investigators found him, he refused to speak until they showed him the photograph. His expression changed immediately. He recognized Blackwater Station. He recognized the men. And he recognized Emily. Then he asked the question that stunned everyone in the room. Did you find the file? Investigators asked what file he meant. Reed looked at the photograph, then whispered, the one Emily left behind. He said there had been a file. Emily had kept copies of everything she discovered. Names, payments, photographs, railway schedules, police reports. She had hidden the file before she disappeared, and someone had spent 39 years searching for it. Reed said the men believed the file had been destroyed, but Emily had never told them where it was. She had hidden it. And the forgotten file discovered in 2024 was not the file Reed meant. It was something else. A copy. A clue. A doorway. The real file was still missing. And according to Reed, it contained the one piece of evidence that could identify everyone involved. He knew where Emily had hidden it. But before investigators could ask the location, Reed said something even more disturbing. She didn't hide it for the police. Then who was it for? Reed looked toward the window. For the person she trusted most. He refused to say the name. Then he asked for a lawyer. The interview ended. But investigators now knew the case had another layer. Emily had anticipated betrayal. She had created a backup. She had hidden evidence. And somewhere, perhaps still intact after nearly 40 years, was a file capable of exposing the entire operation. The search moved back to Millhaven. Back to Emily's home. Back to the place where she had started her final journey. Investigators examined the original house. It had been sold years earlier, but Margaret had lived there until her death. Her belongings had been placed in storage. Among them was a wooden desk. Emily's desk. The desk she had used before disappearing. Inside one drawer, investigators found a false bottom. Underneath was a small envelope. The paper was yellow. The seal was broken. Inside was a single photograph. Emily standing beside her mother. And on the back, written in Emily's handwriting, "If they find me, look beneath the floor." Investigators returned to the house. They lifted the floorboards. Nothing. Then they checked the basement. Nothing. Until one investigator noticed an old foundation wall. One section sounded hollow. They removed the bricks. Behind them was a metal box, locked. The box carried a date. September 13th, Sill 1985. One day before Emily disappeared. Inside was a cassette tape, a set of photographs, a list of names, and a handwritten letter. The first line read, "My name is Emily Carter. If you are reading this, I am probably dead." The room went silent. The letter continued. Emily described the railway yard, the shipments, the women, the men who followed them, the police officer who warned her, and the man she believed was helping her, Thomas Reed. But the final paragraph contained a name no investigator had seen before, a name connected to every disappearance, a name that sat above Stroud, above Hale, above Vane, above Reed. Emily had written it in capital letters, Charles Wilson, and beneath it, "He owns everything." The investigators searched the name. Charles Wilson had been a wealthy Virginia businessman. He had owned transportation companies, industrial properties, railway contracts, security firms, and Dominion Recovery. He had died in 1997, but his financial records were extensive, and one account remained active long after his death, an account controlled by a trust. The trust had made payments to Stroud, to Hale, to Vane, to Reed, and to one final person, a police official who had never been named in the original investigation, the same official who had signed the report declaring Emily's disappearance a probable voluntary departure. The case had finally reached the top, but there was still one question. What happened to Emily after September 25th? The answer was hidden in the cassette. The tape contained her voice, weak, breathing hard, but unmistakably hurt. She said she had discovered where they were taking the women. She said she knew who controlled the operation. Then she said something that made the investigators stop the recording. "They don't know I copied the list." A pause. "I know where they keep the originals." Another pause. Then Emily whispered, "If I get out, I'll tell everyone." The recording ended. But before the tape went silent, another sound appeared. A door opening. A man's voice. And Emily saying one final sentence. "You promised you'd help me." The man's answer was barely audible, but investigators recognized the voice. Thomas Reed. And his reply was chilling. "I did." Then the recording ended. The recording ended with a click. For several seconds, nobody in the room moved. The voice of Emily Carter had survived 40 years in the dark. Not a rumor. Not a second-hand memory. Not a sentence written by someone else. Her voice. Her breathing. Her fear. And the voice answering her belonged to Thomas Reed, the man who had told police he barely knew where she was. The man who claimed he had not seen her after September 14th. The man who had spent decades living under another name. The investigators played the final 30 seconds again. Then again. There was no doubt. Reed had been with Emily. And whatever happened after that recording, he knew more than he had ever admitted. But the cassette contained another clue. A faint metallic sound appeared just before the final click. Someone was opening a door. The sound was followed by footsteps. Then a second male voice. Not Reed. Not Hale. Not Stroud. A deeper voice. Calm. Almost bored. The voice said one word. Enough. Emily stopped speaking. The tape ended. Investigators isolated the voice. They compared it against archived recording, old interviews, business meetings, public speeches, police radio recordings. The result was not immediately conclusive, but one recording produced a striking similarity. A 1984 television interview with Charles Wilson, the businessman who owned Dominion Recovery, the man whose trust had paid everyone, the man Emily had named in her hidden letter. Wilson had spoken publicly about economic development in Virginia. His voice was deeper than the recorder, older, but the cadence matched. The pauses matched. The pronunciation of certain words matched. Investigators believed Wilson had been in the room when Emily made the recording, but there was a problem. Wilson had been dead since 1997. He could never be questioned. So investigators turned to the people who had worked for him. They found one former secretary, Helen Ward. She had been 26 in 1985. She remembered Wilson's private office. She remembered Stroud. She remembered Hale. And she remembered Emily Carter. When investigators showed her the photograph, Ward immediately recognized her. She came to the office. Ward said, "When?" "September." Before she disappeared. What did she want? Ward stared at the photograph. She wanted to see Mr. Wilson. Why? She said she had evidence. The investigators asked what happened next. Ward said Wilson refused to meet her. Instead, he instructed her to send Emily to Thomas Reed. Reed had supposedly been a friend, someone Emily trusted. Ward remembered Wilson giving Reed a sealed envelope. She never saw what was inside, but she remembered the instruction. Make her understand. Investigators asked what that meant. Ward shook her head. I didn't know. Then she remembered something else. The envelope had a red stamp. A number. 17. The same number appearing in Hale's notebook. The same number carved into the Blackwater tunnel. Emily had been classified long before she disappeared. She had been monitored, tracked, and assigned a number. The investigation now focused on what Subject 17 had discovered. Emily's hidden letter provided the answer. She had found records showing that women were being monitored around transportation corridors. She had discovered photographs. She had discovered payments. She had discovered false police reports. But she had also discovered something more dangerous. The women were not being abducted randomly. They were being selected. Investigators compared the names in Emily's documents with employment records. The women had worked in places where they could observe transportation activity, truck stops, restaurants, railway offices, hotels, gas stations. They had seen shipments. They had heard conversations. Some had witnessed illegal dumping. Others had seen people being transported at night. The organization needed them silent. Emily had begun collecting their names. She believed there were at least 23. Her list contained 18. 5 names were missing. At the bottom, she had written, I don't think they are all dead. That sentence changed the investigation. If Emily believed some women were still alive, then the operation may not have been about murder alone. It may have been about intimidation, detention, blackmail, control. Investigators searched for surviving witnesses. One name stood out. Laura Bennett. Subject 12. She had supposedly disappeared in 1983, but investigators found a Social Security record showing activity under her maiden name in 1994, then again in 2001, then again in 2010. Laura had not died. She had disappeared deliberately. Investigators tracked her to a small town in Pennsylvania. When they found her, she refused to speak. She closed the door. She told them to leave. Then one investigator showed her a photograph of Emily. Laura's expression changed. She began crying. She finally opened the door. And she said, They told us nobody would believe us. Laura had been 18 when she disappeared. She had worked at a roadside restaurant near Millhaven. She had seen men unloading barrels from unmarked trucks. She had reported it. A week later, she was followed. 2 men approached her. They told her she had made a mistake. They offered money. She refused. Then they threatened her family. Laura fled Virginia. She changed her name. She never contacted police again. Investigators asked whether she knew Emily. Laura said yes. She came to me. What did she want? To know what I had seen. And what did you tell her? Laura looked down. I told her to stop. Why? Because they were watching her. Laura said, Emily did not listen. She believed the evidence was too important. She believed the police would eventually help. Laura warned her that the police were part of the problem. Emily refused to believe it. Until one night, Laura said, Emily called her. She sounded scared. What did she say? She said she had found the man at the top, Charles Wilson. Laura nodded. She said she had proof. That was the last time Laura spoke to Emily. But Laura remembered something else. Emily had told her about a hidden location, a place where the organization stored original records, not Dominion Recovery, not Blackwater Station, somewhere else, a place called Ashford House. The name appeared in Emily's notes. Investigators searched property records. Ashford House had belonged to Charles Wilson. It stood outside Millhaven. The property had been abandoned since 1998. The house remained. Investigators obtained a warrant. Inside, they found dust, broken furniture, old carpets, collapsed ceilings. Nothing appeared significant. Then they entered the basement. One wall was covered by wooden shelves. Behind the shelves was a steel door. The door had no handle, only a keypad. The system was decades old, but the numbers still worked. Investigators found the code in Wilson's estate record. The door opened. Behind it was a room no one had known existed. Filing cabinets lined the walls. Boxes filled the floor. Photographs, receipts, police reports, railway manifests, medical records, and folders. Dozens of them. Each folder carried a number. The sequence continued. There were 31 folders, 31 subjects. The investigators stood in silence. The missing women were not a theory. They were documented, tracked, photographed, and monitored. Some folders contained only photographs. Others contained detailed reports, employment, family, daily routines, vehicles, friends, addresses, medical information. Every movement had been recorded. Emily's folder was thicker than the other. Inside was a photograph taken outside her home, another at the clinic, another at the Blue Lantern, another at the railway crossing. The organization had followed her for months. Then investigators found a handwritten assessment. Subject 17, increasingly suspicious. Below it, potential exposure risk, extreme. And finally, containment authorized. The date was September 12th, Sill 1985, 2 days before Emily disappeared. The cold case had finally produced a document showing intent. Emily had been targeted before the night she vanished. The organization had decided to contain her. But who authorized it? The signature was partially smudged. Forensic analysts scanned it, compared it, reconstructed missing strokes. The signature belonged to Charles Wilson, but investigators discovered something else. A second signature appeared beneath it. William Stroud. Stroud had approved the police response. He had approved the operation. He had helped remove the evidence. He was not simply protecting Hay. He was part of the command structure. Then came the most important folder. Subject 18. Mary Collins. Inside was a photograph dated October 1985. Mary was alive. She was standing inside the same basement room. But the photograph had been taken after Emily disappeared. Mary was wearing a necklace. A silver necklace. The same necklace investigators had seen around Emily's neck in the Blackwater photographs. That meant the necklace had been passed from one woman to another, or the photograph had been staged. Then investigators looked closer. Mary's face was bruised. She was holding a piece of paper. On it was written, 17 was here. Emily had been in the room before Mary. The organization had moved the women through the same location, one after another. The investigators searched the folder for Mary's fate. The last photograph was dated October 21st. After that, nothing. No death record. No burial record. No further photographs. Mary vanished, just as Emily had. The case had become much larger than one missing woman. But Emily's story remained at the center because her folder contained one document none of the others had. A letter. It had never been mailed. It was addressed to Margaret Carter. Emily had written, Mom, If something happens to me, don't believe them when they say I ran away. The next line was smudged. Then, I found out where they take us. The rest of the page was missing. Investigators searched the room. They found the missing section inside another folder. Subject 31. A woman whose identity was unknown. The page had been folded around a photograph. The photograph showed a road, a mountain road, and in the distance was a small building. Emily had circled it. On the back, she had written, "Last transfer." The building was located nearly 200 miles from Millhaven, a remote property owned by Wilson. The property had been sold in 1990. The buyer demolished the original building, but one underground structure remained. Investigators obtained satellite images. They found an unusual concrete entrance hidden beneath trees. A ground-penetrating radar scan revealed a large underground cavity. The excavation began. The entrance was sealed with concrete. Behind it was a narrow staircase. The air smelled of damp soil. The investigators descended. At the bottom was a corridor. Along the walls were scratches, dates, initials, numbers, then a name, Emily. Below it, 09/26, the same date as the photograph at Blackwater Station, but the corridor continued. At the end was a steel door. The door was locked from the outside. Investigators forced it open. Inside was a small room. There was a chair, a table, a rusted lamp, and on the wall, written in faded black ink, "I was here." The handwriting belonged to Emily, but there was something beside it. A second message, different handwriting. She left alive. Investigators froze. If the message was authentic, Emily had survived the room. She had been moved again. The question was, where? Then one investigator noticed a ventilation shaft. It connected to an old maintenance tunnel. The tunnel led toward a private road, and at the end of that road was an abandoned farmhouse. Property records showed the farmhouse belonged to Thomas Reed in 1985. Reed had told police he barely knew Emily. He had lied. He had owned the final transfer location. Investigators searched the farmhouse. Most of it had collapsed, but beneath the kitchen floor was a small concrete chamber. Inside were restraints, old clothing, photographs, and a cassette recorder. The recorder was damaged. The tape inside was partially melted. Technicians managed to recover fragments of audio. Emily's voice appeared again. She was crying. She said she wanted to go home. Then Reed spoke. He told her nobody was coming. Emily asked why. Reed answered, "Because they already know." A long silence followed. Then Emily said, "My mother will find me." Reed replied, "Your mother doesn't know where you are." Emily whispered, "She will." The tape ended, but one final sound remained. A vehicle engine. Then a door slammed, and another voice said, "Take her to the river." Investigators searched the property maps. A river ran less than 2 miles away. The route was isolated. There were no houses nearby, no witnesses, no cameras, and no records showing anyone had been there that night. But the farmhouse records contained one final clue, a fuel receipt. September 26th, Sill 1985, 11:48 p.m. Purchased by Thomas Reed. Destination, River Road. The case had reached the darkest point yet. Emily had survived for nearly 2 weeks after her disappearance. She had been transferred between multiple locations. She had left warnings. She had hidden evidence. She had tried to expose the people responsible. And on September 26th, she was taken toward the river. After that night, there were no photographs, no recordings, no sightings, no confirmed evidence. For 39 years, investigators had assumed Emily vanished on September 14th. Now they knew she had lived beyond that date. But the question that had haunted Margaret Carter for decades remained. What happened at the river? The answer was not in the police file. It was not in the railway record. It was not in Wilson's basement. It was not in Hale's garage. It was somewhere beneath the water. And in 2025, investigators returned to the river with a sonar team. The search began at dawn. The water was dark, cold, almost completely still. For hours, nothing appeared. Then, at 10:42 a.m., the sonar operator stopped. A rectangular object was visible beneath the riverbed. Not natural, not debris. A vehicle. And on the side of the submerged vehicle was a faded blue paint mark, the same color as Emily Carter's car. The team prepared to recover it. For the first time in 39 years, they were about to see what had been hidden beneath the water, and inside the vehicle, investigators believed, might be the final piece of the forgotten case, the answer to what happened to Emily Carter, and possibly the evidence that would finally connect every name in the file. The recovery operation began before sunrise. The river was almost black beneath the winter sky. A thin mist hovered above the surface, moving slowly between the trees. Divers entered the water one at a time, carrying lights powerful enough to cut through the darkness below. For nearly an hour, they found nothing. Then the sonar operator spoke. "I'm on it." The object was exactly where the scan had indicated. A vehicle, buried beneath nearly 6 feet of mud. The recovery team attached cables. The winch began to pull. Mud erupted from the riverbed. The water turned brown. Slowly, the shape emerged. A roof. A windshield. A rear bumper. The vehicle was badly damaged, but the color was still visible. Dark blue. Investigators immediately compared the model with Emily Carter's missing car. It was the same make, the same year, the same body style. But there was one problem. The identification number had been scratched away. Someone had deliberately removed it. The divers continued working. When the trunk was opened, they found rusted tools, fragments of clothing, and a small metal box. The box was sealed. Inside was a cassette tape. Another tape. Another voice. The investigators returned to the laboratory. They cleaned the cassette, digitized the audio. Then they pressed play. Static filled the room. A woman's breathing. A man's voice. And then Emily. Her voice was weaker than on the first recording. She sounded exhausted. But she was alive. She said the date. September 26th. Then she said, "If they move me tonight, this is where they'll take me." A pause. "I don't know if anyone will find this." Then another voice appeared. Thomas Reed. He asked her where she had hidden the file. Emily refused to answer. Reed threatened her. She remained silent. Then came a sound investigators had heard before. A door opening. A third man entered. His voice was deeper, calm, the same voice from the earlier recording. He said, "Enough." Emily asked, "Why are you doing this?" The man answered, "Because you wouldn't stop." The tape became distorted. Then Emily said one sentence, "You're afraid of what's in the file." Silence. The man replied, "Everyone is." Then the recording ended. Investigators listened again. They compared the voice against the recordings of Charles Wilson. This time, forensic voice analysis produced a stronger result. The probability of a match was high, but investigators still needed something more concrete. They returned to the vehicle. Inside the glove compartment was a rusted key. The key carried a number, 17. It opened a small lockbox recovered from the trunk. Inside was a photograph. Emily, standing beside the river, alive. The date was September 26th, hours before the vehicle entered the water. But the photograph contained something else. A bridge. Behind Emily. And beneath the bridge, a second vehicle. A white van. Investigators enlarged the image. The van belonged to a medical transportation company. The company had been owned by Charles Wilson. The vehicle was registered to a driver named Daniel Mercer. Investigators searched Mercer's history. He had died in 2004, but his personnel file contained a strange notation. Transferred September 27th, SIL 1985. The transfer destination was not another state. It was a private psychiatric facility. The facility had closed in 1998. Its records had been destroyed, or so investigators believed. Then a former administrator came forward. She remembered Daniel Mercer. She remembered a young woman being brought to the facility in September 1985. She remembered the woman was frightened. She remembered that she was not listed under her real name. The name on the intake form was Jane Miller. Investigators searched the archive. The intake record still existed. Age, 23. Brown hair. Blue eyes. Scar above the left eyebrow. Emily Carter. The woman had been alive, and she had been taken to the facility under a false identity. The date was September 27th. The day after the river photograph. The mystery deepened. Why had Emily been taken to a psychiatric facility? The answer appeared in the medical notes. She had supposedly suffered a psychological breakdown. She was described as delusional, paranoid, dangerous. The notes claimed she believed a group of powerful men were following her. She claimed women were being kidnapped. She claimed police were involved. The doctor wrote, "Patient demonstrates severe paranoia," but one page had been added later, a handwritten note. Patient's statements may have factual basis. The doctor who wrote it was named Dr. Helen Shaw. She was still alive. Investigators found her living in Oregon. She was 91. When they showed her Emily's photograph, she immediately knew who she was. She wasn't crazy, Shaw said. She was terrified. Shaw explained that Emily had repeatedly asked for police. She begged to speak to her mother. She claimed she had evidence. She claimed the people responsible controlled the police. Shaw believed her. But she had been ordered not to contact authorities. Who ordered you? Shaw looked away. Mr. Wilson. The investigators asked how Wilson had authority over a medical facility. He didn't officially, but the facility depended on his funding. He had donated money. He had financed equipment. He had influence. And he had told the administrators that Emily was dangerous. Shaw said she tried to resist. But another doctor threatened her job. The pressure continued. Then Emily disappeared from the facility. Her record stopped after October 4th. There was no discharge summary, no transfer record, no death certificate, nothing. She simply vanished again. Investigators searched the facility's transportation records. A vehicle had left the property at 2:15 a.m. on October 5th. Destination: Ashford House, Wilson's private estate. The same house where investigators later discovered the hidden basement. Emily had been brought back into the system. But why? The investigators returned to the basement file. Subject 17 had an additional document, a medical evaluation dated October 6th. It stated, "Subject remains resistant." Another line, "Recommend permanent resolution." The signature was not Wilson's. It belonged to William Stroud. Investigators now had direct evidence that Stroud had authorized a plan to permanently silence Emily, but they still needed to know whether that plan was carried out. The answer was buried in the financial records. 3 days later, a payment was made to a private contractor. The amount was large. The description read, "Removal and disposal." The contractor's company had disappeared years earlier, but its owner was still alive. His name was Richard Cole. Cole lived in Florida. When investigators contacted him, he refused to speak. Then they showed him the payment record. He became visibly shaken. He finally admitted he had been hired to destroy evidence, not bodies, evidence, documents, photographs, tapes. He said he was paid to remove boxes from Ashford House, but he insisted he never knew what happened to Emily. Investigators asked where the boxes went. Cole said, "Blackwater, the same abandoned station, the same tunnels, the same place where Emily's name had been carved into concrete." Cole said he had been ordered to burn the materials, but before he could finish, someone arrived. He remembered the man, Samuel Vane. Vane told him to leave. Cole obeyed. He never returned. Investigators asked what happened to the boxes. Cole said he didn't know. Then he remembered one detail. One box was different. How? It had a red ribbon. Did you see the label? Cole nodded. 17. The investigators now believed Emily's original evidence file had survived, somewhere, and perhaps it was still connected to the case. They returned to Blackwater Station. The tunnel was searched again. This time, investigators focused on the old furnace room. The room had been badly damaged, but beneath a collapsed section of brick was a metal container. Inside were burned documents. Most were unreadable, but several photographs survived. One showed Emily. Another showed Mary Collins. Another showed Laura Bennett. The fourth showed a woman investigators had never seen. She was standing beside Emily. The photograph was dated October 2nd, still 1985. Emily was still alive. She was still being held. And she was not alone. The woman beside her was smiling. Investigators searched the missing person database. They identified her as Rachel Morgan. Rachel had disappeared in 1984. Her family had never known what happened. But now investigators had proof she had survived at least until October 1985. The photograph was devastating. 2 missing women. Alive. Together. And trapped. On the back of the photograph was a sentence. "She knows where the list is." Investigators asked Laura Bennett about Rachel. Laura began crying. She said Rachel had escaped. She got out. When? Before Emily. How? She ran. Where did she go? Laura hesitated. She went to the river. Investigators asked whether Rachel had contacted police. Laura shook her head. She was too afraid. Rachel had apparently escaped from one of the holding locations, but there was no record of her disappearance after that. Instead, she had vanished again. The investigators searched the river area. They found an old newspaper clipping. October 7th, Sill, 1985. A local article reported an unidentified woman found near a rural road. The woman had no identification. She refused to speak. She was transported to a hospital. Then she disappeared. The hospital record was missing, but the description matched Rachel. Investigators began searching for witnesses. A nurse came forward. She remembered Rachel. She remembered the bruises. She remembered Rachel repeatedly saying one name, Emily. The nurse also remembered Rachel carrying a small object, a key. The number on it was 17. Investigators believed Rachel had escaped with something belonging to Emily, but they never found the key until the recovery of the blue vehicle. The key inside the glove compartment matched the lockbox, but it also matched a second lock. The lock was found at the psychiatric facility. It opened a cabinet. Inside the cabinet was a single file, Emily's file, the original, not the copy, the file Emily had hidden, the file that Reed had mentioned, the file that investigators had spent decades searching for. Inside were photographs, payment records, names, addresses, police reports, railway manifests, and a list of 31 women. But beside each name was another column, status. Some were marked released, some transferred, some deceased. Emily's name was marked, transferred, unresolved. Rachel Morgan was marked, escaped, recover. Mary Collins was marked, pending. The word beside Mary had been crossed out. Then investigators saw another notation. Subject 17 knows too much. Below it, permanent action authorized. The date was October 8th, Sill, 1985. 4 days after Emily disappeared from the medical facility, investigators traced the authorization. The signature belonged to Charles Wilson, but there was a second signature, Thomas Reed. Reed had not merely helped find Emily, he had authorized her final transfer. Investigators confronted Reed again. This time he agreed to speak. He was 71. He looked exhausted. He said he had spent 40 years trying to forget, but he admitted he knew Emily had been held. He admitted he had transported her. He admitted he had been at Blackwater Station, but he denied killing her. I didn't kill Emily, he said. Then who did? Reed looked down. Wilson. Where? The river. Investigators asked what happened. Reed said Emily was taken to the river on September 26th. Wilson was there. Stroud was there. Hale was there. Vane was there. They planned to kill her, but something went wrong. Emily escaped. She ran into the woods. They chased her. Reed claimed he stopped. He said he could not continue. He said Emily looked at him. And she said, "You're going to let them kill me?" Reed said he froze. Wilson ordered him to follow. He refused. That was the last time he saw Emily. Investigators asked what happened after that. Reed said he heard a gunshot. One shot. Then silence. But he insisted he did not see Emily die. The investigators returned to the river. The submerged vehicle had been abandoned. The trunk contained no body, but the vehicle itself belonged to Wilson's company. Inside was another clue. A piece of fabric caught beneath the rear seat. Forensic testing identified human DNA. The profile was female. It was incomplete, but mitochondrial DNA was consistent with Emily's maternal family line. For the first time, investigators had biological evidence connecting Emily to the vehicle. The cold case was no longer only a mystery. It was becoming a murder investigation. But there was still no body. And there was still one impossible question. If Emily had escaped the river, where did she go? Investigators searched every surviving record from late 1985. Then they found something. A hospital admission. October 9th. An unidentified young woman found unconscious near a highway. The woman had no identification. She had a scar above her left eyebrow. Brown hair. Blue eyes. Age approximately 23. The hospital discharged her 3 days later, under the name Jane Miller. the same false name used at the psychiatric facility. But the record contained a handwritten note. Patient requested to contact Margaret Carter. The call was never made. Someone had crossed it out. The signature belonged to a hospital administrator, a man who later became a director of Wilson's Foundation. The trail was tightening. Emily had survived the river. She had reached a hospital. She had tried to contact her mother. Someone stopped her. Then she disappeared again. For decades, her family believed she was dead. But the evidence suggested Emily may have remained alive for days, possibly weeks, possibly longer. And if she survived, someone had been moving her from place to place. The investigators searched the October hospital records for discharge information. The last line read, "Transferred to private care." No facility listed. No physician. No destination. Just one signature. William Stroud. The same man who had controlled the original investigation. The same man who had authorized Emily's permanent action. The same man whose fingerprints were inside her abandoned car. By now, the investigators were no longer asking whether Stroud knew what happened. They were asking how many people had helped him hide it, and how far the operation reached. The answer was buried in Emily's original file. The last page contained a list of names. At the top was Wilson, then Stroud, Hale, Vane, Reed. Below them were 12 other names: judges, business owners, police officials, doctors, railway executives, and one name that made investigators stop: a federal official. The file suggested the network had protection beyond Virginia. The final line was handwritten by Emily. "If they find this, they will come for everyone." Below it was a date: October 10th, Sill 1985. And beneath that, "I am still alive." The investigators stared at the sentence. For 39 years, everyone had believed Emily vanished in September, but her own handwriting suggested she was alive in October. The case had been built on the wrong date, the wrong timeline, the wrong assumption, and perhaps the wrong crime. Because Emily Carter may not have been murdered immediately. She may have been kept alive because she knew where the evidence was, and someone spent weeks trying to find it. The evidence was now in police custody, but the final mystery remained. Where was Emily? And what happened after October 10th? The answer would come from a place no one had searched: a small rural cemetery, an unmarked grave, and a name that appeared nowhere in the original investigation: a woman buried in 1986. No family, no identification, no obituary, only a grave number. Investigators ordered the remains exhumed. The DNA test would take weeks, but the case had already changed forever. For the first time since 1985, investigators had a realistic possibility of answering the question that had haunted Millhaven for nearly 4 decades. Emily Carter may finally have a grave, and if the DNA matched, the forgotten file would have done what thousands of hours of investigation could not. It would finally tell the truth. But before the laboratory returned the result, investigators noticed something carved into the cemetery stone beside the grave. 3 numbers: 1, 7, 18. Emily, Mary, and the unknown subject. The same numbers that had appeared in the tunnel. The same numbers in the files. The same numbers connected to the women who disappeared. Someone had marked the grave deliberately. Someone knew. And someone had been waiting for investigators to find it. The grave was opened at 6:40 in the morning. The cemetery was nearly empty. No reporters. No cameras. Only investigators, forensic specialists, and a small group of people who had spent years refusing to believe Emily Carter had simply vanished. Margaret was gone. She had died without ever learning what happened to her daughter. But her younger brother, Daniel Carter, stood behind the police line. He was 79 years old. He had carried Emily's photograph in his wallet for decades. When the first layer of earth was removed, he turned away. Nobody spoke. The grave was shallow, too shallow for a normal burial. There was no headstone, only a number. The same number investigators had found in the old records. The remains were carefully removed. The bones were fragile. The clothing had almost completely deteriorated, but one object survived: a small metal clasp. Investigators recognized it immediately. Emily had worn a silver necklace. The clasp matched photographs taken before her disappearance, but that still did not prove the remains belonged to her. The DNA test would. The remains were transported to the laboratory. The waiting began. For decades, the Carter family had waited. Now the investigators waited. Every hour felt longer. Then, 3 days later, the call came. The mitochondrial DNA matched Emily's maternal family. The remains were Emily Carter. After 39 years, she had been found. But the discovery created a new question. How had Emily ended up in an unmarked grave hundreds of miles from the place where she disappeared? The forensic examination revealed something even more disturbing. Emily had suffered a fracture to her left arm. There were signs of blunt force trauma, but the cause of death could not be determined with certainty. There was no bullet, no obvious stab wound, no definitive weapon. The investigators could only say that the injuries were consistent with violent assault. Then they found a tiny fragment of metal embedded near one of the ribs. The fragment was sent for analysis. It appeared to be part of a vehicle, a small piece of painted metal. Blue. The same blue found on Emily's car. Investigators compared the paint composition. The samples were consistent. Emily had likely been injured while inside or near the vehicle recovered from the river. But the vehicle had been submerged. The grave was miles away. How did she get there? The answer came from an old transportation document. A private ambulance had been dispatched on October 11th, SIL 1985. The destination was the rural cemetery. The vehicle belonged to a company connected to Charles Wilson. The driver was listed as Daniel Mercer, the same man who had transported Emily to the psychiatric facility. Mercer was dead, but investigators found his old route sheets. One entry read, Patient 17, destination, Cedar Ridge Cemetery. The time was 2:20 a.m. The date was October 11th. The day after, Emily wrote her final message. The evidence was devastating. Emily had been alive on October 10th. By October 11th, she was being transported under the number 17, and shortly afterward, she was buried without identification. But investigators still had to determine who ordered it. The ambulance company was owned by Wilson. The authorization came from Stroud. The transport was performed by Mercer, and the grave had been prepared by a cemetery worker named Frank Dyer. Dyer was dead, but his son remembered something. His father had once told him that a man had arrived in the middle of the night. He carried paperwork. He paid cash. He instructed Dyer to bury a young woman under a false identity. The son had been 14 at the time. He remembered hearing his father ask, "Who is she?" The man replied, "Someone nobody will come looking for." Investigators asked whether the son remembered the man's appearance. He did. He described a tall man, gray hair, dark coat, silver watch. Then he remembered the watch. It had a distinctive square face. Investigators searched photographs of Charles Wilson. In several images, Wilson wore the same watch. The evidence was closing around him. But Wilson had been dead for decades. Prosecutors needed someone alive, someone who could be charged, someone who could explain the operation. William Stroud had died in 2007. Robert Hale had died in 1993. Samuel Vane had died in 2001. Daniel Mercer had died in 2004. Charles Wilson had died in 1997. Only Thomas Reed remained. The man who had driven Emily. The man who had been present at Blackwater Station. The man whose voice appeared on the recording. The man who had signed the authorization. Reed agreed to another interview. This time, he brought a lawyer. He looked older, smaller, almost fragile. But when investigators placed Emily's photograph on the table, his expression changed. "You found her," he said. "Yes." Reed closed his eyes. "I always knew you would." Investigators asked him why. He said Emily had been different. She wouldn't stop. What did she know? Everything. Why did Wilson want her dead? Reed hesitated. Then he said, "Because she had the names." "What names?" "Everyone." "Everyone involved?" Reed nodded. "Judges, police, companies, politicians, doctors." The investigators asked how the operation worked. Reed said the organization used transportation routes to move women and illegal material. Some women witnessed shipments. Others discovered financial records. Some were employees who knew too much. The women were monitored, threatened, sometimes detained. And when someone became a serious risk, she was classified. The numbers were not names. They were warnings. Subject 17. Emily. A problem to be solved. Reed admitted he had been recruited because Emily trusted him. He had dated her. He knew her routines. He knew where she went. He knew who she talked to. He became the bridge between Emily and the people hunting her. The investigators asked when he first betrayed her. Reed said, September 12th, 2 days before her disappearance. He had told Wilson that Emily had evidence. Wilson ordered him to keep her close. Reed followed her. He watched her. He photographed her. He reported everything. Then Emily discovered the surveillance. She confronted him. Reed said he lied. He told her he was worried about her. She believed him. That was how she was trapped. On September 14th, Emily called Reed. She wanted to return a book. But Reed already knew what would happen. He told Wilson. Wilson gave the order. Bring her to the crossing. Reed said he did. Emily drove there. Hale arrived shortly afterward. Stroud came in his police cruiser. They surrounded her. Emily realized she had been betrayed. She tried to leave. Hale blocked the car. Stroud approached. Reed told investigators he heard Emily scream. She asked for help. Stroud told her she was under arrest. She asked why. He said, "You know why." Then they took her. Reed said he did not know where she would be held, but later he learned. Dominion Recovery, then Blackwater, then the medical facility, then the river, then the farmhouse, then the cemetery. Investigators asked whether Wilson personally ordered Emily's death. Reed said yes. He said Wilson made the decision on October 10th. Emily had refused to reveal where she hid the original file. Wilson believed the file would destroy him. He ordered Stroud to make sure Emily disappeared permanently, but Reed claimed something went wrong. Emily had already escaped. The investigators confronted him. From where? Reed shook his head. I don't know. You were there. I left. Where did she go? I don't know. Who killed her? Reed stared at the floor. I wasn't there. The investigators pushed harder. Reed finally said, Mercer. The name stunned them. Daniel Mercer, the officer who had originally documented Hale's presence, the man who transported Emily to the psychiatric facility, the man whose route sheet showed patient 17 being transported to the cemetery. Mercer had apparently played both sides. He had helped expose the operation. Then he had become involved in hiding it. Why? Because Mercer had a family. Reed said Wilson threatened them. Mercer had tried to protect himself, but he eventually became trapped. Investigators searched Mercer's old file. They found a letter, never mailed. Mercer wrote that he knew Emily was being held. He wrote that he had tried to help her. He wrote that he had taken photographs, and he wrote that Wilson knew. The final line was chilling. If anything happens to me, the original evidence is under the church. Investigators immediately searched old churches connected to Mercer. There were 3. The first contained nothing. The second had no records. The third was abandoned. Its basement was sealed. Investigators broke through the wall. Behind it was a small wooden cabinet. Inside were photographs, police reports, Cosette tapes, and a notebook. Mercer's notebook. The pages described everything. He had documented Emily's movements. He had documented the women. He had documented Wilson's payments. He had documented Stroud's order. And he had documented the night Emily died. The entry was dated October 10th. Mercer wrote, She escaped. Then, Wilson is furious. Then, he says she cannot leave the property. The next entry was shorter. I saw her running toward the road. Then, Reed followed her. Then, gunshot. Investigators turned the page. Nothing. The final entry was dated October 11th. I was ordered to move the body. There it was. The first direct written evidence. Emily had been killed. Mercer had moved her body. The cemetery had been selected. The number 17 had been assigned, and the entire operation had been concealed. But the notebook contained another surprise. Mercer had secretly copied the original evidence file. He had hidden it. The investigators realized the forgotten file discovered in 2024 might not have been accidental. It could have been Mercer's backup, a piece of the truth deliberately left behind. But Mercer had written one more thing. The real list is still missing. The original list. The one Emily had discovered. The one containing every person involved. Investigators searched the notebook for clues. A page near the end contained a drawing. A church. A tree. A bridge. And a number. 31. 31 subjects. 31 folders. But the drawing also contained an arrow. It pointed toward a location outside Millhaven, a place called St. Mary's Chapel. The chapel had been demolished in 2003, but its cemetery remained. Investigators searched old burial records. One grave stood out. An unnamed infant, buried in 1985. The grave had no connection to Emily, but beneath the stone was a small cavity. Inside was a metal tube. The tube contained a microfilm cartridge. Investigators sent it to the laboratory. The film contained documents, dozens of them, names, payments, dates, photographs, and one list, 31 women. Every woman identified by number. Every woman linked to a location. Every woman marked with a status. The investigators began reading. Some had been released. Some had escaped. Some had disappeared. Some had died. But the list contained one final category: protected. 3 names appeared there. Emily was not one of them. Rachel Morgan was not. Mary Collins was not. But 3 other women were. One of them was still alive. One lived in California. Another in New York. The third lived in Virginia. Investigators contacted them. All 3 remembered Emily. All 3 had been involved with the same network. And all 3 said something identical. Emily had discovered the real purpose of the operation. It was not simply about illegal shipments. It was about controlling witnesses. The organization used threats, surveillance, and financial pressure to prevent people from exposing crime. Women who witnessed sensitive activity were classified. Those who could be intimidated were released. Those who refused were detained. Those who threatened the organization were eliminated. Emily had refused. She had copied everything. She had hidden the evidence. And she had tried to expose the network. That was why she became subject, 17. The investigators now had enough evidence to reconstruct her final weeks, but they still faced a major problem. The evidence was old. Most of the suspects were dead. The only living principal suspect was Thomas Reed, and Reed had just made another claim. He said there was one person still alive who knew exactly what happened. Someone above Wilson. Someone who had never been named in the original documents. A person Reed called the architect. Investigators asked for the name. Reed refused. They showed him the photographs, the tapes, Emily's remains, the cemetery records. He still refused. Then they told him that forensic evidence had linked him to the vehicle. His expression changed. He understood. The case was no longer based only on old testimony. Modern science had brought it back. Reed finally spoke. The architect is still alive. The room went silent. Who? Reed looked directly at the investigator. Daniel Mercer wasn't the architect. Wilson wasn't either. Then who? Reed whispered the name. It was someone whose signature appeared on multiple documents. Someone who had never been investigated. Someone who had spent decades living quietly under a legitimate identity. And when investigators searched the name, they discovered the man was still alive. He was 86 years old. He lived less than 50 miles from Millhaven. He had never moved, never changed his name, never disappeared. He had watched the investigation from a distance. He had watched Emily's family search. He had watched the newspapers. He had watched the case become forgotten. And for 39 years, he had said nothing. His name was Arthur Vail, former county prosecutor, former legal advisor to Charles Wilson, and, according to Thomas Reed, the man who designed the entire system. Investigators obtained a warrant. They searched Vail's property. In the basement, they found filing cabinets. In one cabinet was a folder labeled, Carter, Emily, 17. Inside was a photograph taken on October 10th, Sill 1985. Emily was standing outside the farmhouse, alive. The photograph had been taken hours before her death, but beside her stood Arthur Vail, the man who had supposedly never met her. On the back of the photograph was a handwritten sentence, final opportunity. And beneath it, if she refuses, proceed. For the first time, the investigators had the person who appeared to sit above everyone else, the architect, the man who had watched the entire operation from the beginning. But when they found him, Arthur Vail was not frightened. He was waiting. He opened the door. He looked at the investigators. Then he looked at the photograph they were holding, and he smiled. You finally found the file, he said. One investigator asked, How did you know we were looking for it? Vail's smile disappeared. Then he said something that changed the case again. Because Emily wanted you too. The investigators froze. Vale claimed Emily had planned everything. She had known she might die. She had deliberately created evidence. She had deliberately hidden the file. And she had deliberately left a trail. But why? Vale said Emily was not trying to expose the entire organization. She was trying to expose one person, him. He said she had spent months building a case. She knew the others were replaceable. Wilson, Shroud, Hale, Vane, Reed. They were tools. The real power was elsewhere. Vale said Emily had discovered financial transfers connecting the network to federal contracts. She had found evidence of corruption far beyond Virginia, and she had hidden the documents where no one would think to look. Vale refused to reveal the location, but investigators already had one clue. The microfilm contained 31 names. At the bottom was a handwritten message. The final file is not underground. Then another line. It is where they keep the truth. Investigators immediately understood. The last evidence was not hidden in a tunnel, not beneath a house, not under a grave. It was hidden inside an official institution, a place where records were supposed to be safe, a place nobody would think to search. The courthouse. The original courthouse. The same building where Emily's disappearance had first been reported. The same place where the case file had been created. And where, 40 years earlier, someone had deliberately removed the truth. Investigators returned to the basement archive. They opened the oldest cabinets. Case files. Property records. Court documents. Thousands of pages. Then they found a box marked 1985. Administrative records. Inside was a folder. No case number. No victim name. Just a date. September 14th. Sill 1985. The investigators opened it. The first page contained a single sentence. This matter must never be reopened. The signature beneath it belonged to Arthur Vale. But the final page contained something even more disturbing. A handwritten note. If Subject 17 survives, destroy everything. The note was dated October 10th, Sill 1985. The same day Emily was photographed alive. The same day she disappeared. The same day someone decided she had to die. And at the bottom of the page was one final instruction. Move the body before sunrise. For 39 years, that sentence had been buried in a courthouse archive. Now it was evidence. Now it was a weapon. And now, finally, the cold case had a name. Not missing person. Not disappearance. Murder. Emily Carter had been silenced because she knew too much. Her body had been hidden. Her evidence had been buried. Her family had been lied to. And the people responsible had spent decades believing time would erase the truth. They were wrong. Because one forgotten file had survived. One voice had survived. One photograph had survived. One grave had survived. And the truth had survived with them. But the investigation was not finished. There was still one question investigators had not asked Arthur Vale. Why had Emily's original file been hidden inside the courthouse? And what exactly had she discovered that was powerful enough to frighten an entire network? The answer was waiting in a sealed envelope found behind the final archive cabinet. The envelope had never been opened. It carried Emily's handwriting. And on the front were 5 words. For the person who finds me.